Hello, good evening, and once again, I welcome you all to this episode of The Last Clue. I hope your entire family is doing well and looking after one another. Recently, a web series titled Heera Mandi was released on Netflix. I haven't had the time to watch it yet, but if I get the chance, I surely will. What caught my attention, though, is that Heera Mandi isn't just a fictional story. It's actually based on a real place with a deep and complex history. Now, I can't say for sure how accurately the series portrays reality or how it's been presented on screen, but the story I'm about to share with you today is truly connected to the real Heera Mandi. Once known as the Diamond Market, once referred to as the Royal Colony, and once called Adab Colony, this place wasn't always seen the way it is today. It was once a center of art, culture, and refined expression, a hub of poetry, literature, and graceful conversation. In fact, this was the very place where royal families used to send their young princes to learn etiquette, to understand how to speak in society, how to carry themselves, how to sit, how to rise, and how to live with dignity. So everything I've just mentioned, and the story I'm going to share today, belongs to that very Heera Mandi, the small neighborhood tucked away in Lahore. Even today, Heera Mandi still exists in that very corner of the city. Remarkably, this place has carried on for centuries, sustaining one of the oldest professions known to mankind, a trade that has involved selling something far deeper than goods. And yes, that trade continues even today. After the partition, when India and Pakistan became two separate nations, Heera Mandi found itself within the borders of the newly formed Pakistan. Over time, many began to view Heera Mandi with judgment and discomfort. The so-called respectable white-collar class labeled it a blemish on the city's dignity and demanded its removal. Yet, ironically, those very same people often found themselves drawn to Heera Mandi under the cover of night. If you observe the visuals of Heera Mandi closely, its story bears a striking resemblance to that of Delhi's red light district, situated right next to Ajmeri Gate. There too, you'll find a stretch of shops lined up in sequence, quietly hiding centuries of untold stories behind their shutters. All those shops stay busy throughout the day, bustling with regular trade. Just above them lie the courtyards, spaces where mudra performances take place and where an entirely different kind of transaction unfolds. The tale of Lahore's Heera Mandi mirrors this almost exactly. During the day, the street below is filled with shops selling musical instruments, traditional food, and daily essentials. But as evening falls, those shops quietly shut their doors, and a different kind of marketplace awakens, one that has existed in silence for generations. Back during the reign of Emperor Akbar, Lahore held great significance. It was one of the major cities of the empire, as India and Pakistan were one undivided land back then. Lahore was not just culturally vibrant, but also a thriving center for trade and commerce. During Akbar's rule, the royal family, the Mughals, resided in a special section of the city known as the Royal Neighborhood. Surrounding this elite area were the quarters of those who served the court, attendants, workers, and other staff, all settled nearby so they could easily access the palace whenever duty called. This entire section of Lahore, once known as the Royal Neighborhood, carried that title with pride. Within this grand area, there was a specific part that gradually came to be known as a brothel district. Back then, it was famous for mudra performances, an elegant dance form gifted by the Mughals, rooted in classical tradition and refined artistry. But in those days, mudra wasn't viewed through the lens of shame or stigma. It was considered a respected art form, performed in the courts and appreciated for its grace and cultural richness. In fact, it was regarded as a refined art form, and those who lived in that area and performed mudra proudly identified themselves as artists. They were held in high esteem and treated with respect. During the Mughal era, even young princes were sent to these courtyards, not for indulgence, but to learn the finer aspects of culture, etiquette, music, and poetry. These spaces became centers of learning, where they were taught how to write gracefully, speak eloquently, and carry themselves with poise. Beyond being part of the royal quarters, this area was also famously known as the neighborhood of etiquette and refinement. During the Mughal period, this place enjoyed great fame and carried a certain prestige. However, things began to change when Ahmad Shah Abdali invaded. Historical accounts suggest that during his campaign, he brought with him a number of women from Uzbek and Afghan regions. These women were later settled in the once respected royal neighborhood. Over time, the character of the area began to shift. What was once known for its cultural richness and royal ties slowly to transform into what became known as the Diamond Market, Heera Mandi, where commerce of a very different kind began to take root. During that period, as all this unfolded, livelihoods were scarce, and many women, out of sheer compulsion, were drawn into the trade of selling themselves. But the tide shifted once again when Lahore came under the control of a new ruler, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. During his reign, his eldest son, Heera Singh Dogra, rose to prominence. Eventually, Heera Singh Dogra was appointed as the Prime Minister of Lahore. It was around this time, somewhere between 1843 and 1844, that the area began to be referred to as Heera Mandi, named after Heera Singh, and not just the sparkling illusion the name might suggest. Eventually, the image of this so-called diamond market began to transform. Though the name remained Heera Mandi, its function evolved. At one point, it became home to the largest grain market in the region, bustling with trade and economic activity. This part of Lahore, once associated with royal culture and later with vice, now played a key role in filling the state's treasury through commercial success. Interestingly, a similar pattern is seen in Delhi. Just ahead of its red light district, known as GB Road, lies one of the biggest grain markets not only in Delhi but possibly in all of Asia, located near the iconic Lahore Gate. So in many ways, Delhi's red light district and Lahore's Heera Mandi share striking similarities, both in history and structure. After the grain market was established, the area flourished for a while. But then came the British. When colonial rule took over, the British administration redefined the purpose of Heera Mandi. For the first time, they officially designated it as a red light area. Under British governance, regulations were introduced. Every brothel, every establishment involved in such trade, now had to be licensed. What had once been an organic cultural space was now institutionalized under colonial control. Once the licensing system was introduced, British officials, along with the police and government representatives, began formally stamping and registering brothels. Meanwhile, many of the so-called respectable men of the time, their faces concealed in secrecy, continued to visit these places under the cover of night. As this dual reality unfolded, the trade of flesh had already become an open secret. What was once an unspoken practice was now legitimized under colonial bureaucracy, hidden behind the formality of government-issued licenses. As the fear of police raids grew, people began to worry that if their secret visits were exposed and word reached their families, their social standing would be ruined. Slowly, visitors started to disappear. With dwindling clientele came a wave of poverty and unemployment. Eventually, many women and even some men of Heera Mandi found themselves fully immersed in the trade of survival. The original essence of the place, which once celebrated art, music, and classical dance, especially the intricate beauty of Kathak, started to fade. Once, people came to Heera Mandi specifically to witness these performances, and grand gatherings were hosted in honor of the art. But when the British arrived, they completely altered the identity of Heera Mandi. What was once a cultural hub was now reduced to nothing more than a red light district. Then came 1947. India and Pakistan parted ways, becoming two separate nations. Yet, the existence of Heera Mandi remained unchanged. However, with Pakistan now established as a Muslim state, The presence of such an area sparked strong opposition. People began questioning how a red light district could exist in an Islamic nation, and soon voices grew louder, demanding its removal. But despite the protests, nothing really changed. Instead, a slow decline began for Heera Mandi. People continued to visit under the cover of night, yet by day, they spoke out publicly against its existence. Fast forward to 2024, and Heera Mandi still stands, its legacy still lingering. The dances continue, the trade persists, and people still come. However, with the rise of social media and the digital age, a new shift has taken place. The emergence of online platforms and escort services has further eroded Heera Mandi's relevance, leaving it struggling to survive in a world that has moved beyond its walls. Today, the condition of Heera Mandi is worse than ever. And with that, this was the story of Heera Mandi, once a symbol of art, now a shadow of its past. But the true story of Heera Mandi holds a different layer altogether. It is said that within this very Heera Mandi in Lahore, there once lived an extraordinarily beautiful courtesan who captured the hearts of all who saw her. From wealthy nobles to powerful nawabs, men from elite families would visit the area just to catch a glimpse of her. Her name was Nargis, but everyone affectionately called her Niggo. She wasn't just admired for her looks. There was something about her presence that left people utterly enchanted. This was the era of Niggo, and it was her presence that brought endless attention to Heera Mandi. People were captivated by her beauty, her grace, and the elegance of her dance. So much so that, for a time, Heera Mandi seemed to revolve entirely around her. Her fame was such that many visited not for the place itself, but simply for Niggo. Around this same period, cinema was beginning to take shape. India saw the birth of its film industry, with Datta Phalke making what is believed to be the country's first film around 1913. Back then, women were hesitant to work in films, as cinema was viewed with suspicion and often labeled as something disgraceful. During that time, it wasn't uncommon for male actors to portray female roles by dressing as women, simply because it was nearly impossible to find a woman willing to act. This mindset took root in both India and Pakistan, where women from respectable families would never consider joining the film industry. Ironically, today, the film world is unimaginable without actresses, but it all began in an era when finding a heroine was one of the biggest challenges. In those days, filmmakers, directors, and producers began turning their attention toward places like Heera Mandi, seeking talent for the growing film industry. Many women from Heera Mandi went on to work in Indian cinema, and several others found roles in the early days of Pakistani films. Among them was Nargis, lovingly known as Niggo, whose stunning beauty, captivating style, and mesmerizing dance had already made her a legend in Lahore. Her charm wasn't just confined to the courtyards, she left a mark on the screen as well. During that time, there was a film producer desperately searching for a lead actress, but no woman was willing to take on a role. Faced with rejection after rejection, he didn't know where to turn. One day, he happened to visit Heera Mandi and noticed an unusually large crowd gathered at a particular courtyard, the very place where Niggo performed. Curious, he asked why there was such a commotion and decided to step inside with the crowd. There, he witnessed Nargis, Niggo, in the midst of her performance. The moment he saw her dance, he was completely mesmerized. Her beauty, elegance, and mesmerizing dance left such a strong impression on the producer that he immediately decided he wanted her in his next film. He approached Niggo with the offer, and as fate would have it, she too was longing to leave the life of Heera Mandi behind. She agreed. In 1964, Nargis made her film debut in a movie titled Ishrath. Her dance performance in the film became widely popular across Pakistan, earning her instant recognition. After that, her journey in cinema truly began, and one film after another followed. Films like Shahenshi Jahangir, Layla, Majnu, Indalib, Love and Jungle, Afsana, and Mohabbat became part of her growing legacy. Nearly 80 to 100 films had some connection to Heera Mandi, with many of them prominently featuring dance sequences. Niggo, better known by her real name, Nargis, rose to immense fame after stepping into the world of cinema. Her talent, charm, and presence on screen made her one of Pakistan's most celebrated stars of that era. Her life seemed to be going smoothly, and by the 1970s, a well-known Pakistani producer named Khwaja Mazhar arrived on the scene. Having watched numerous films, Mazhar was familiar with Nargis's work and talent. He approached her with an offer to star in his upcoming film titled Courtesan. During the filming process, something unexpected happened. Mazhar and Nargis fell in love. It was like a story straight out of a movie, except it was real. One day, Khwaja Mazhar confessed his feelings and proposed to her, expressing his desire to marry her. Nargis, who had long dreamed of leaving behind her past in Heera Mandi, saw this as a chance to redefine her life. As a dignified and respected wife, she accepted his proposal, and the two got married. However, not everyone supported their union, and opposition followed them from both sides. Khwaja Mazhar was a devoted husband, but Nargis faced challenges in adapting to her new role as a wife. Her parents, who still lived in Heera Mandi, were deeply troubled by her decision to marry into a respectable household, especially if it meant she might move to India. They feared for their own survival, as they had long depended on the income Nargis brought in. For them, her marriage meant the end of financial security. Struggling with this reality, they made several attempts to prevent the union from happening. Despite their efforts, however, Mazhar and Nargis, also known as Niggo, went ahead and got married. At that time, there was an unwritten rule in Heera Mandi, a tradition that if a girl decided to leave the quota, whether to get married or pursue another path, the person taking her away was expected to pay a set amount to her family or guardians. This payment acted as a kind of release, acknowledging that her relatives, who were still part of Heera Mandi, would no longer benefit from her earnings. It was a way of buying her freedom. When Niggo decided to marry, she tried to find a way around this rule, but ultimately agreed to follow it. In the end, it was settled that if she was going to leave and start a new life, the compensation had to be paid. Fortunately, Khwaja Mazhar, being not only a successful producer, but also a man of influence, was able to fulfill this condition. Khwaja Mazhar was a respected figure in both society and government circles. When confronted with a demand for payment, he firmly refused, saying, "She is my wife, not a commodity. I'm not buying her." His refusal sparked intense conflict between the two families. Nargis's family felt cheated, as they had expected compensation, while Mazhar stood his ground, unwilling to turn love into a transaction. Tensions escalated, and Nargis's relatives began to withdraw, frustrated that they were losing both a source of income and control. Despite their repeated efforts to persuade her, Nargis remained firm. She too longed for a life of dignity. The disputes continued behind the scenes, but through it all, Niggo was genuinely happy in her new life. Niggo began receiving frequent calls from Heera Mandi, especially from her mother, urging her to return. But each time she refused. Her family, meanwhile, was facing a sharp decline in their financial situation. Niggo had been the crown jewel of Heera Mandi, a rare gem whose presence brought life, prosperity, and attention to the entire area. With her gone, that shine had faded, and the once vibrant courtyards felt empty. The loss was not just emotional, but deeply economic. Her parents, feeling abandoned and helpless, were deeply wounded by her absence and the silence that followed. Niggo's mother, sister, and brother strongly believed that if she returned, their lives would once again be filled with wealth and comfort. They saw her not just as family, but as the source of their livelihood. Their desperation grew, and despite many attempts to bring her back, Niggo never returned. Finally, her mother decided to use emotional manipulation. She realized Niggo wouldn't return on her own, so she sent her a message saying she was gravely ill, claiming her death was near, and that she only wished to see her daughter one last time before leaving this world. The message from her mother said she was gravely ill and wished to see Niggo one last time before dying, just to find peace. As a daughter, Niggo couldn't ignore it. After all, it was her mother who had raised her. The words deeply affected her. She turned to her husband, Khwaja Mazhar, and said with a heavy heart, "I want to go see my mother once. I don't know if I'll ever get another chance. She's very unwell, and I need to be there." Khwaja Mazhar also understood that it was a daughter's right to see her mother, especially in such moments. So he gave Niggo permission to go. After years of marriage, Niggo returned to Heera Mandi for the first time. Her entire family welcomed her with joy. Though her mother was perfectly fine, she pretended to be seriously ill, acting weak and frail. She emotionally pleaded with Niggo to stay for just a few more days, saying she could pass away any moment. Caught in a web of emotions, Niggo decided to stay by her mother's side in Heera Mandi. During her stay, Niggo's mother, sister, and brother gradually began to manipulate her thoughts. They subtly convinced her that the life she had with Mazhar wasn't worth much, that there was no real value in her marriage. They insisted she belonged in Heera Mandi, where she had her identity, her fame, and her independence. They reminded her how well she was doing in films, how much recognition she had earned, and that she could continue everything while staying there. A few days later, Mazhar called, gently asking her to return and inquiring about her mother's health. Niggo responded that her mother was still unwell, but didn't give a clear answer. As Mazhar kept calling repeatedly, hoping she would come back, Niggo began to distance herself and refused each time. Slowly, the constant words of her mother and brother began to influence Niggo's thinking. Their manipulations took root, and she unknowingly started to believe them. She had been mentally conditioned. Whenever Mazhar called, she would politely delay him, saying she'd return in a few days. Days turned into weeks, and time slipped away. Mazhar had no idea what was truly happening. He kept calling, hoping she'd return, but Niggo never came. Eventually, overwhelmed with worry and confusion, Khwaja Mazhar decided to go to Heera Mandi himself. He went straight to her family's home and asked, with concern in his eyes, where Niggo was. She told him she was doing well, and he believed her. Trusting her words, Khwaja Mazhar quietly returned home. The date was 5th January 1972. On that day, he once again visited Heera Mandi, reaching the home where Niggo's family lived. With concern in his heart, he asked Niggo to return, offering his support if she needed anything. But by then, Niggo was no longer the same. Her thoughts were no longer her own. Her mother, sister, and even her brother had deeply influenced her, clouding her judgment and emotions. She firmly told him she didn't want to leave and wished to stay with her mother for a few more days. Mazhar tried to reason with her, gently urging her to return. He even offered to take her to a well-known hospital and have her checked by the best doctors. Repeating his concern, he assured her that if she was truly unwell, he would get her the best possible treatment. He pleaded with her, explaining that everything could be handled better if she just came back with him. But despite his efforts, Niggo remained unmoved. Had she not been so deeply manipulated, perhaps she would have agreed to leave. But her mind was no longer her own. She continued trying to justify her decision. Khwaja Mazhar, overwhelmed by frustration and betrayal, lost control. In a sudden blinding moment of rage, he drew a pistol from his pocket and opened fire. The first shot struck Niggo, followed by bullets hitting two musicians who were present, and then her uncle. In mere seconds, 4 people lay motionless, each one killed on the spot. As the chaos unfolded, a crowd quickly gathered, and Khwaja Mazhar was overpowered and handed over to the authorities. The police arrived and arrested him on the spot. Niggo, gravely wounded, could not survive. She was laid to rest in a Shahi Mahalla graveyard near Heera Mandi in Lahore. A formal case was filed against Khwaja Mazhar, and following the legal proceedings, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murders of his wife, 2 musicians, and her uncle. However, fate had its own course. After serving 7 years behind bars, Khwaja Mazhar succumbed to illness and died in prison. He too was laid to rest in Lahore. Even today, the tale of Khwaja Mazhar and Niggo, also known as Nargis, lives on in the narrow lanes of Heera Mandi. The neighborhood still stands, steeped in its complex history. By day, it's a typical market, bustling with shops and ordinary commerce. But as dusk falls, the scene transforms. The sound of drums echoes once again, and the evening bazaar comes alive. People from well-off, respectable families still visit, drawn by curiosity, nostalgia, or the mystique that Heera Mandi has never lost. But now, with the rise of social media and the changing landscape of modern society, even the world's oldest profession has taken a hit. The digital age has altered how things operate, and the once thriving business of Heera Mandi no longer enjoys its former prosperity. Those who are still part of that world, those selling, surviving, and trying to make ends meet, now live in increasing poverty and obscurity. And that was the fading yet unforgettable story of Lahore's Heera Mandi. Now, I don't know, what is the story of film director Sanjay Leela Bhansali's movie Heera Mandi? If I see it, I will tell you. And if any of you have seen it, then do tell me, give your opinion. So, this is the story for today. If today's story gave you chills, then believe me, this is just the beginning. The Last Clue brings you true stories every week, real, disturbing, and drawn straight from the darkest corners of the human mind. If you're someone who's fascinated by true crime, psychological thrillers, political stories, secret operation, celebrity life, world history, unsolved mysteries, and all of Verity's stories, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because the next story might be the one that keeps you up at night. Subscribe because the truth won't wait. I'll return next time with another gripping and unforgettable tale. We will meet you on Thursday evening at 6 o'clock Indian time with a new story. It's a different story. Till then, take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you very much.